Welcome back, everybody. Today we're diving into a pretty heavy event, a mid-air collision that happened over the Potomac River in Washington, D.C. back in 2025.
Yeah, tough one for sure.
Absolutely. We're going to be looking at a really in-depth news article that goes through the whole incident, the aftermath, and what we know so far from the investigation that's still ongoing.
Right.
And I think what we're really trying to do today is go beyond just the mechanics of what happened.
Sure.
We want to look at, the human stories,
Yeah,
the incredible work of those rescue teams,
right.
and then all those questions that still linger even as the investigation continues.
Yeah, it's a story with so many layers to it. You've got the technical side, obviously the air traffic control, the flight paths, all the data that tells the story of those final moments.
Right.
But just as important is the human side, the lives lost, the families left behind. And it raises these big questions about how safe our skies really are as they just get more and more crowded.
Exactly. And you know what makes this deep dive even more fascinating? Is that it all starts with what seems like a totally routine flight.
Hmm.
American Airlines Flight 5342, operated by PSA Airlines, was on its way from Wichita, Kansas to Reagan National Airport.
Okay.
Now, at the same time, a U.S. Army Black Hawk helicopter was doing some training exercises
Right.
out of Fort Belvoir in Virginia.
Mhm.
It's just chilling to think about these two aircraft operating in what we assume is a super-controlled airspace,
Yeah.
ending up on this collision course.
It really makes you think about how complex that airspace around a major airport like Reagan National really is. I mean, you've got constant arrivals and departures, planes, helicopters operating at lower altitudes, this constant back and forth between pilots and air traffic control.
So let's talk about those communications in those crucial moments leading up to the crash.
Yeah.
The article says that air traffic control cleared the plane to land on a shorter runway, runway 33. Can you break that down for those of us who aren't pilots?
Yeah, sure. So runways are numbered based on their magnetic heading. So runway 33 basically means it's aligned at 330 degrees on a compass.
Oh.
Now, choosing a specific runway for landing depends on a lot of factors.
Right.
Wind direction, traffic flow, in this case, using a shorter runway like runway 33 could have been a way to make the traffic flow better during a busy time.
Interesting. Okay. And what about the helicopter? What were they up to in the airspace at that point?
Well, they were on a training flight, and the article mentions that air traffic control actually asked the helicopter operators if they could see the incoming plane.
Oh, wow.
So the controllers definitely knew both aircraft were pretty close to each other.
Which makes what happens next even harder to grasp.
Yeah.
CCTV footage actually caught the moment of impact, this mid-air explosion at 8:47 p.m. local time.
Yeah.
Just a horrifying thing to imagine,
Absolutely.
and just impossible to think about what those on board went through in those final seconds.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah, and then you look at the data and it just reinforces how sudden and violent the collision was. The plane's flight tracking shows this huge drop in both altitude and speed right before the crash,
Right.
which suggests there was just no time for any kind of evasive action.
It all happened so fast.
Yeah. And we also have those audio recordings from air traffic control.
Oh, yeah.
You can hear that exact moment when they see the fireball on their radar screens, and then instantly they're scrambling to get emergency teams out there. The panic and urgency in their voices. I mean, it just hits you right in the gut.
Yeah, it's a heavy reminder of the incredible responsibility that air traffic controllers carry every single day. They're the unsung heroes keeping our skies safe. And in this instance, they were faced with this sudden and just horrific event that unfolded in a matter of seconds.
Absolutely. And now shifting to the human cost of this tragedy.
Yeah.
We know that there were 60 passengers and 4 crew members on the plane and 3 soldiers on that helicopter.
Mhm.
Tragically, no survivors.
And as you start to look at who is on that flight, it gets even more heartbreaking. The article mentions that a lot of big names in the U.S. figure skating world were on that plane. They were heading back from a national development camp.
Oh gosh, yeah, that's right. And there's this really powerful quote from Doug Zegev. He's the CEO of the Skating Club of Boston. And he talks about losing 6 members of his club.
Oh, wow.
2 coaches, 2 young athletes with so much potential, and 2 mothers who were there supporting their kids. Just really brings home the human impact to this whole thing.
It's a whole community affected.
Absolutely. And to add to the global scale of this loss, the Kremlin even confirmed that Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Naumov, those Russian champion figure skaters,
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that.
they were on the flight too.
Yeah.
It just shows you how an event like this can touch so many different parts of the world, bringing people together in this shared grief.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder of our shared humanity.
For sure. And in the midst of all that shock and sorrow, this massive rescue and recovery effort gets underway. Over 300 responders, boats, helicopters, they all converged on that crash site within minutes.
It's incredible how quickly they're mobilized.
Right. And it's important to point out the just insane challenges they were facing.
Oh, yeah.
John Donnelly, the fire chief in D.C., he described the operation as highly complex because of the conditions they were dealing with.
It sounds like it was a nightmare.
Cold, windy weather, icy water, you can barely see anything.
Wow.
It just made their job so much harder.
I can't even imagine.
And those first responders, I mean, they were really working against the clock. Initially, the
Yeah.
focus was on finding survivors.
Right.
Hypothermia was a huge concern in those freezing waters.
Of course.
But as time went on and it became clear that there were no survivors,
Oh, man.
the operation shifted to recovery.
Yeah.
And even in those brutal conditions, they managed to recover 28 bodies from the wreckage. Just speaks volumes about their dedication and how resilient they were in the face of such a difficult task.
Absolutely. It's amazing what they were able to do.
It really is. And what I found really interesting is that they actually set up a recovery center at the D.C. fire helipad just to receive the remains.
That makes sense.
It really emphasizes how sensitive and careful they were, being, acknowledging the need to treat each recovery with the utmost respect.
Yeah, definitely.
And as that recovery effort was going on, the investigation into what caused this collision got started.
Right, so we're moving from the immediate response to the long process of figuring out exactly what went wrong.
Yeah, we're left with so many questions like, why didn't that helicopter move out of the way of the plane? Was it mechanical failure, pilot error, some other totally unforeseen factor?
Those are the kinds of questions that air crash investigators spend months, sometimes even years, trying to answer.
It's got to be like solving a giant puzzle.
Yeah, they look at every single piece of data.
Oh, wow.
The flight data recorders, the black boxes,
Right.
radar tracking, info communication logs between the pilots, and air traffic control, even eyewitness accounts.
So they're really trying to recreate every single detail of what happened.
Yeah. Exactly, and it's not about pointing fingers or blaming anyone. It's about understanding how it all unfolded, if there were any breakdowns in protocol or safety procedures that contributed to it.
So ultimately, it's about preventing something like this from happening again.
Exactly. Every air crash investigation is about figuring out not just what happened, but why, so we can learn from it and make flying safer for everyone.
And with an incident this big, I can only imagine the pressure on those investigators must be immense.
Oh, absolutely, especially with all the media attention and the fact that some pretty famous people were involved. But these investigations are incredibly thorough and objective no matter what the circumstances are.
And it's interesting to think about how these investigations have changed over time with all the new technology. Do you think investigators have a better grasp on what happens in those critical moments now?
Well, technology has definitely made a big difference. I mean, think about flight data recorders now. They capture way more information than they used to, so we have a much more complete picture of what was going on with the aircraft and what the pilots were doing. And radar systems are way more sophisticated, too.
Right.
We can track aircraft movements with much greater precision than before.
They're working with a whole lot more data than they would have had even a few years ago.
Yeah, exactly. And that means they can recreate the sequence of events leading up to the crash with a lot more accuracy, analyze pilot inputs, engine performance, altitude, changes, all those crucial details to really understand what happened.
That's incredible. And what about the human side of things? It's not just about the mechanics of the plane, right?
Absolutely. You're right. Air crash investigations always take into account the human factor.
Okay.
Pilots, air traffic controllers, even maintenance crews, everyone involved is human. And we all make mistakes. We get tired, stressed out. All of those things can affect our judgment.
So things like the pilot's training, their experience, their mental state, even any distractions they might have been dealing with, all of that comes into play.
Exactly. It's about looking at the big picture, understanding that these accidents rarely have a single cause. It's usually a whole bunch of factors, both technical and human, that lead to these kinds of tragedies.
It's like trying to understand the human element within this incredibly complex system.
Yeah, and that's what makes these investigations so challenging, but also so crucial.
And in this particular case, the investigation also got some attention from people outside of the aviation world then. President Donald Trump, while he did offer his condolences to the victims, he also raised some really specific questions about what those involved did or didn't do.
Yeah, his comments, especially those about why the helicopter didn't get out of the way and what air traffic control is doing, I think they really resonated with a lot of people who were just trying to wrap their heads around how this could have happened.
It's understandable that after something so devastating, people want answers. They want to know if it could have been prevented.
Right. And those questions, even though they're hard to answer for sure, they often push us to take a closer look at those safety protocols and procedures. In this case, Trump's comments highlighted just how complicated it is to manage a busy airspace like that and the immense pressure on both pilots and air traffic controllers.
It makes you think about those split-second decisions. You know, were the pilots aware of the danger? Did they have enough time to react? And from the air traffic control side, was there some kind of miscommunication or a bad call that led to this?
Those are exactly the things investigators would be digging into. It's not about placing blame. It's about understanding what happened step by step and if there's anything we can do better.
So it's about learning from this and making sure something like this doesn't happen again.
Exactly. And that's a never-ending process. I mean, the aviation industry has an amazing safety record, and a big part of that is because of the work investigators, regulators, and industry folks do. They're always looking for ways to improve safety and reduce risks.
This whole deep dive has been really eye-opening. We've talked about the technical side of the crash, the human stories, and the incredibly complex investigation process.
Yeah, it's been a lot to unpack.
It really has. And I'm curious what stood out to you the most from all of this? What really got you thinking?
I think for me, it's the fact that even with all the technology and safety measures we have, the human element is still there. And we can't always control or predict it. It makes you realize that no matter how hard we try, there are always going to be risks in any complex system.
That's a really powerful point, and I bet that's something investigators think about all the time. How do you create systems that are as safe as possible while knowing that people make mistakes?
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, but it's what drives innovation and makes flying safer.
And as we wrap up, I think it's important to remember that even though we focused on the technical and investigative side of things, the real heart of this story is the victims and their families.
Absolutely. Their loss is immeasurable. And it's a stark reminder that behind all the data and statistics are real people whose lives were changed forever.
We hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this tragic event and maybe even sparked your curiosity to learn more.
There's always more to learn, and we encourage you to keep asking questions and talking about aviation safety and the complexities of the world we live in.